The history of Egypt begins long before the famous pharaohs and pyramids. Around 5000 BC, small villages began to emerge along the Nile River, one of the largest and most important rivers in the world. The Nile was not just a source of water, it fertilized the surrounding lands, making them perfect for agriculture. This modest beginning, with communities focused on growing wheat and barley, would lay the foundation for one of the most impressive civilizations in history. These early villages consisted of simple houses made of mud and straw. Although rudimentary, these settlements had a clear social structure, with community leaders responsible for coordinating agriculture and food distribution. The Nile, with its regular floods, allowed these communities to thrive, providing abundant harvests and resources for expansion. Over the centuries, these villages began to transform into more organized and complex centers. Water management and the development of irrigation techniques became essential for the growth of these early communities. The annual floods of the Nile were celebrated as a gift from the gods, and the ability to control these waters became a symbol of power and wisdom. Gradually, the villages connected, forming the first Egyptian cities. Hierakonpolis, and Naqada were some of the oldest and most influential. These cities were not just economic centers but also places of cultural and religious development. In Hierakonpolis, for example, archaeologists found evidence of temples and statues indicating the worship of local gods long before the unification of Egypt. During this period, a new class of leaders emerged, not only warriors but also priests and tribal chiefs who controlled the cities. These leaders were seen as intermediaries between the people and the gods, gaining power and influence. Around 3100 BC, Egypt was experiencing an era of significant changes. The growing rivalry between cities and their leaders led to conflicts, but also paved the way for unification. In this context of disputes, a legendary figure emerged, Narmer, also known as Menes. He is widely credited as the unifier of Upper and Lower Egypt, an extraordinary achievement that marked the beginning of the First Dynasty, and what we can call the first great empire in history. The famous Narmer palette, an iconic artifact in Egyptian history, depicts the symbolic moment of this unification. On it, Narmer is shown wearing the crown of Upper Egypt on one side and the crown of Lower Egypt on the other, symbolizing his control over both regions. This achievement was not just military, it also unified two distinct cultures, bringing peace and a sense of national identity that would endure for millennia. Unification brought about a series of changes that would forever transform Egyptian society. Memphis was established as the capital, strategically located at the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. Consequently, the city became a thriving administrative and religious center, where the pharaoh was seen as an intermediary between the gods and the people. Unification also allowed for more centralized control of agriculture, trade, and the defense of the territory. With consolidated power, Narmer initiated projects that showcased the strength and wealth of the newly unified kingdom. Temples, palaces, and elaborate tombs were built for the pharaohs, many of them in Saqqara. The centralized administration under the pharaoh enabled the organization of large public works, such as canals and dikes, which further improved agriculture. This development was crucial for sustaining the growing population and strengthening royal authority. Creating a unified identity was an important step for Egypt's stability. Symbolism and rituals were introduced to reinforce the pharaoh's image as a divine leader, who had the gods' approval to rule. The double crown worn by the pharaohs, representing the union of Upper and Lower Egypt, became a powerful symbol of this new era of prosperity and cohesion. The invention of hieroglyphic writing was a revolutionary milestone in the history of ancient Egypt. Emerging around 3200 BC, this form of writing not only facilitated communication but also became an essential tool for administration, religion, and the preservation of Egyptian culture. Composed of a combination of symbols representing sounds, objects, and ideas, hieroglyphic writing was complex and beautiful, reflecting the artistic character of Egyptian civilization. the first hieroglyphs appeared on ceramics and tomb labels, mainly used to record the names of kings and information about their possessions. Over time, the writing evolved to describe events, royal decrees, and religious rituals, becoming an indispensable part of Egyptian life. Hieroglyphs were written on stone, wood, and papyrus, a precursor to paper made from a plant native to the Nile. The ability to record information on papyrus was an innovation that allowed the creation of portable documents, such as contracts, letters, and religious texts. This new form of writing assisted in managing the complex economic and legal systems of Egypt, ensuring that the pharaoh's orders were recorded and executed throughout the territory. More than just an administrative tool, hieroglyphs were deeply linked to Egyptian spirituality. They were used in temples, tombs, and monuments to tell the stories of the gods and the achievements of the pharaohs. The walls of pyramids and temples were decorated with detailed inscriptions, narrating everything from prayers to records of great military feats. For the Egyptians, writing had a magical power, believed to grant eternal life to the words inscribed on tombs. Scribes were trained in special schools, where they spent years learning hundreds of different symbols. Their ability to read and write was seen as a direct connection to the gods, as hieroglyphs were considered sacred. This position elevated scribes to a social elite, allowing them to avoid manual labor and acquire privileges, making this profession one of the most desired in ancient Egypt. The invention of hieroglyphic writing also paved the way for other Egyptian writing systems, such as hieratic and demotic, which were simplified forms used in more everyday contexts. Although the use of hieroglyphs eventually disappeared after the end of ancient Egypt, their decipherment, especially with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, returned to the modern world an understanding of a brilliant civilization. The Archaic period, also known as the early dynastic period, marks a moment of consolidation and expansion in ancient Egypt, shortly after unification under Narmer. During this phase, the first Egyptian dynasties began to structure a strong and centralized state, expanding control over the territory along the Nile, and laying the foundations of a powerful administration. Egyptian society became more complex, with a government that coordinated infrastructure construction and managed agriculture efficiently. This phase was marked by the construction of the first great monuments and royal tombs, known as mastabas. Mastabas were rectangular mud brick structures built over tombs, symbolizing the status of nobles and pharaohs. These early monuments, although more modest than the pyramids that would come later, already demonstrated the importance that the Egyptians placed on the afterlife and the legacy of their leaders. It was a period of intense architectural activity that shaped Egypt's spiritual and social landscape. During the Archaic period, the capital Memphis became the administrative and religious heart of Egypt. The strategically located city served as a center of commerce, diplomacy, and worship of the gods. The pharaohs of the First Dynasties dedicated themselves to consolidating power and establishing the figure of the pharaoh as a living god, an intermediary between the people and the gods. This concept of divine kingship helped maintain social cohesion and legitimize central control. Religion began to be organized in a more structured way, with the creation of the first temples dedicated to important gods such as Ptah, Ra, and Horus. Funerary practices also became more sophisticated, with the development of more elaborate rituals to ensure the safe passage of pharaohs to the afterlife. Mummification began to be refined, and tombs were adorned with offerings and inscriptions that narrated the deeds of the deceased, ensuring that their souls would be remembered and honored. The Old Kingdom is often referred to as the Age of the Pyramids, due to the impressive construction of the iconic pyramids that still fascinate the world today. This period marks the peak of the architecture and power of the pharaohs, consolidating Egypt as one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. Governed by the 3rd to the 6th dynasties, the Old Kingdom witnessed unprecedented cultural, economic, and religious flourishing, with the pharaoh revered as a living god on earth. The Pyramid of Djoser, built by the legendary architect and vizier Imhotep, was the first major architectural milestone of this period. Located in Saqqara, this step pyramid was a monumental innovation, symbolizing the pharaoh's ascent to the heavens. Imhotep, considered a genius of his time, not only revolutionized architecture but also contributed to medicine and administration, later being deified by the Egyptians. His work paved the way for the grand pyramids that would follow. The pyramids of Giza, built by the pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty, became the ultimate symbol of the power and ambition of the Old Kingdom. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, Cheops, the largest of them all, is considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. With over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing several tons, its construction still sparks debates about the techniques used. The pyramids of Khafre and Menkaure complete the complex, along with the enigmatic Sphinx, the silent guardian of the Giza Plateau. The construction of the pyramids required unmatched logistical organization, with thousands of workers, including artisans, engineers, and farmers, mobilized during the Nile's floods. These monuments were not just tombs but were also seen as gateways to eternity, designed to guarantee the immortality of the pharaohs. The architecture and alignment of the pyramids with the stars reflected the Egyptian belief in the afterlife and the pharaoh's spiritual journey. Agriculture was the backbone of the Egyptian economy, and the Nile's irrigation system was one of the greatest innovations that allowed the civilization to flourish. The Nile's annual floods covered the banks with rich, fertile silt essential for cultivation. The Egyptians developed an ingenious system of canals and dikes that directed water to the arable areas, ensuring that the crops received the ideal amount of water throughout the year. To maximize agricultural efficiency, the Egyptians used water control techniques such as the shadaf, a simple device consisting of a bucket attached to a long lever, used to lift water from the river into the irrigation canals. This technology facilitated the irrigation of crops during dry periods, allowing the land to remain productive even outside the flood season. This irrigation system was crucial for Egypt's self-sufficiency and prosperity. Agricultural innovations were not limited to irrigation. The use of plows pulled by oxen and copper tools, such as hoes and sickles, significantly increased agricultural productivity. The cultivation of wheat and barley was predominant, providing the basis for the production of bread and beer, essential foods in the Egyptian diet. The introduction of flax also allowed the manufacture of fabrics, which were used both in clothing and as trade items. In addition to grains, the Egyptians grew fruits and vegetables, such as figs, grapes, melons, onions, and garlic. The diversity of crops not only enriched the population's diet but also contributed to the economy, with the surplus being used in internal and external trade. Papyrus plantations, for example, were not only used for the famous papyrus used for writing but also for the production of baskets, sandals, and even light boats. Detailed knowledge of the Nile's flood cycles and agricultural seasons was so important that the Egyptians developed an agricultural calendar based on the river's cycles. The Egyptian year was divided into 3 seasons: Ake, flooding; Parait, sowing; and Shimu, harvest. This organization allowed precise planning of agricultural activities and ensured the sustainability of a growing population over the centuries. The Egyptian agricultural system was, therefore, a combination of ingenuity, adaptation, and observation of nature. The end of the Old Kingdom marked the collapse of an era of prosperity and stability in Egypt. Around 2181 BC, a series of economic, social, and climatic problems began to erode the foundation of pharaonic power. The reduction of the Nile's floods was one of the most devastating factors, drastically affecting agricultural production. Without the regular floods to fertilize the lands, the harvest failed, resulting in famine and food shortages throughout the kingdom. The agricultural crisis led to a series of social and political consequences that worsened the situation. With the lack of food, the government faced difficulties in maintaining public works and paying workers. This weakened the population's confidence in the central power, and the pharaoh, once seen as an incarnate god responsible for order, was now seen as incapable of maintaining Mat, the divine balance and justice. The lack of resources also meant fewer tributes to the pharaoh, reducing his ability to maintain control. With the collapse of central authority, the nomarchs, who were the governors of the provinces, nomes, began to exert more power in their regions. Previously subordinate to the pharaoh, these local leaders started to act more independently, often withholding tributes and maintaining their own militias. Egypt, which was once unified, fragmented into a collection of rival states. This decentralization further weakened the pharaoh's ability to control the territory and restore order. The rivalries among the nomarchs were not limited to politics. Armed conflicts became common, with disputes over land and scarce resources. These internal conflicts exacerbated hunger and the suffering of the population. Looting and revolts became frequent, and the security that the old kingdom had known was replaced by an era of anarchy. Social cohesion, maintained for centuries under the command of the pharaohs, collapsed, leading Egypt into a period of deep instability. The despair of the population was recorded in texts of the time, known as lamentation literature. These texts describe a society in crisis, where hunger, violence, and despair prevailed. One such work, The Instructions of Epure, laments the inversion of social order and the chaos that gripped the country. These documents offer a grim glimpse of living conditions during the collapse of the Old Kingdom, revealing an Egypt unrecognizable to those who lived in the golden times of the pyramids. The First Intermediate Period was one of the most turbulent moments in Egyptian history, marked by the disintegration of central authority and widespread anarchy. With the collapse of the Old Kingdom, Egypt fragmented into various small independent kingdoms, governed by the nomarchs, who had previously been subordinate to the pharaoh. Without a strong central government, these regional leaders began to compete for control of lands and resources, turning the country into a battlefield of constant disputes and rivalries. During this period, two main dynasties emerged as rival forces, the 9th and 10th dynasties, which ruled from Hierakonpolis in the north, and the 11th dynasty, centered in Thebes in the south. These factions fought for control of Egypt, resulting in a prolonged civil war. The political fragmentation led to a weakening of the country's infrastructure, and many of the achievements of the Old Kingdom, such as large irrigation projects and monuments, were neglected or abandoned. The decentralization of power allowed the nomarchs to exercise unprecedented autonomy, governing like small kings in their territories. They assumed total control of military forces, resources, and tax collection, leaving the pharaoh with little more than symbolic authority over what remained of the unified kingdom. This situation caused the regions of Egypt to develop unevenly, with some areas flourishing while others suffered from war and famine. Economic and social difficulties also brought a change in the mentality and culture of the period. The art and literature of the First Intermediate Period reflect an Egypt in crisis, with less emphasis on the splendor of the pharaohs and more focus on the challenges faced by common people. In the midst of this chaos, Thebes began to emerge as a resilient power. The 11th dynasty, initially led by Entefi and his successors, began to consolidate power in Upper Egypt. Under the command of Mentuhotep II, the Thebans finally managed to defeat the Heracleopolitan rivals, reunifying Egypt and ending the First Intermediate Period. This victory not only restored order but also marked the beginning of the cultural and political renaissance that would consolidate in the Middle Kingdom. Although the First Intermediate Period is often seen as an era of decline, it was also a period of transformation and adaptation. The Middle Kingdom marked a period of renaissance for Egypt, following the tumultuous years of the First Intermediate Period. With the reunification of the country under Pharaoh Mentuhotep II around 2055 BC, Egypt entered a new era of prosperity, stability, and innovation. This period is often called the Egyptian Renaissance, due to the resurgence of culture, arts, and centralized administration, which brought back the firm control of the pharaoh over the Egyptian territory. Mentuhotep II, the unifier of the Middle Kingdom, established Thebes as the new capital of Egypt, consolidating power in Upper Egypt and promoting a strong central government. He presented himself as the restorer of divine order, Mat, which had been broken during the period of anarchy. Under his leadership and that of his successors, the Middle Kingdom saw significant administrative reorganization, with the creation of new positions and the redistribution of lands to strengthen royal control. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt experienced significant commercial expansion, which not only strengthened its economy but also broadened its contact with other civilizations. Trade became a vital tool for prosperity, bringing Egypt a wide range of goods not found in its lands. Control over strategic trade routes and the exploration of new territories allowed Egypt to obtain valuable resources such as gold, incense, ebony, and precious stones, which were crucial for the empire's growth. Trade relations with Nubia, located south of Egypt, were particularly important. Nubia was rich in gold and other resources highly desired by the Egyptians. To ensure control over these riches, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom built a series of fortresses along the Nile, such as Buhin and Semna, which protected trade routes and helped maintain Egyptian hegemony in the region. These fortresses also served as outposts for tax collection and protection against invasions. Besides Nubia, Egypt also maintained commercial contacts with the Levant, including areas such as Canaan and Syria. This trade brought exotic goods to Egypt, such as cedar wood used in the construction of boats and temples, and aromatic resins used in religious rituals and mummification. Cultural exchanges with these regions influenced Egyptian art, introducing new styles and techniques that were adapted by local craftsmen, further enriching the material culture of the Middle Kingdom. One of the most famous trade expeditions of this period was to the land of Punt, a mythical region possibly located on the Red Sea coast or the Horn of Africa. Punt was known as the land of the gods, and supplied incense, myrrh, ebony, and exotic animals. The representations of these expeditions, especially those conducted by Pharaoh Hatshepsut in the New Kingdom, show the importance of maritime trade and the Egyptians' ability to navigate long distances to obtain desired products. The commercial activities not only enriched Egypt but also promoted the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Contact with foreign merchants introduced new concepts and innovations in areas such as medicine, writing, and art. The architecture of the Middle Kingdom also thrived, with the construction of temples, tombs, and pyramids in new styles. Although the pyramids of this period were smaller and less durable than those of the Old Kingdom, temples and funerary complexes gained greater prominence. Pharaohs began to build rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings, a precursor to what would become one of the most famous royal cemeteries in Egyptian history. This new approach reflected the evolution of funerary practices and the quest to ensure a glorious eternal life. The ascension of Amenemhat I to the throne marked the beginning of the 12th dynasty, one of the most brilliant and influential of the Middle Kingdom. Ruling from 1991 BC, Amenemhat I was a shrewd and visionary reformer who recognized the need to strengthen central control to avoid the mistakes that led to the previous collapse. One of his first actions as pharaoh was to move the capital of Egypt to a new city called Ajtai, located in the Fayum, south of Memphis. This strategic shift not only reinforced the pharaoh's authority, but also facilitated control over Upper and Lower Egypt. The location of Ajtai was ideal for the administration of the kingdom, as it allowed easy access to the Nile trade routes and desert borders. The new capital symbolized the renewal of royal power and Amenemhat I's commitment to the reunification and prosperity of Egypt. The city was planned to be a powerful administrative and military center, filled with palaces, temples, and government offices that housed the growing state bureaucracy. This helped consolidate governance and improve the management of resources and security of the kingdom. Amenemhat I also implemented a series of administrative reforms to ensure that the pharaoh's power was unquestionable. He reorganized the system of nomes, revising the provincial boundaries and appointing new governors loyal to the crown. These actions reduced the influence of local nomarchs, who had become independent and powerful during the first intermediate period. The centralization of power under Amenemhat I strengthened control over the territory and improved tax collection, ensuring a constant flow of resources to sustain the government and public projects. In addition to political reforms, Amenemhat I invested heavily in Egypt's defense. He ordered the construction of fortresses along the eastern borders to protect the country from invasions by desert nomads and other foreign peoples. The fortifications, such as the famous Walls of the Ruler, were a crucial defensive line that kept enemy incursions under control and ensured the stability of trade routes. These measures reinforced national security and contributed to the sense of safety and order that permeated the Middle Kingdom. The shift to Ijtai also had a profound cultural impact. The city quickly became a center of artistic and literary innovation, with royal patronage encouraging the development of sophisticated works. During the reign of Amenemhat I and his successors, Egyptian literature flourished, with the creation of texts that exalted the figure of the pharaoh and instructed the nobility on the importance of loyalty to the throne. These works, such as the Instructions of Amenemhat, reflected a society that valued order, justice, and the continuity of royalty. Amenemhat I is often remembered as one of the great statesmen of ancient Egypt, a leader who revitalized the empire and laid the foundations for an era of prosperity. The exploitation of natural resources was one of the pillars of power and prosperity during the Middle Kingdom. Egypt, with its limited natural reserves in the Nile Valley, always relied on the exploitation of mines and quarries to obtain valuable materials such as gold, copper, precious stones, and limestone. These often long and dangerous expeditions were sponsored by the pharaoh and led by trusted officials who commanded large teams of workers. The quest for resources became a strategic activity that boosted the economy and strengthened state power. Egyptian quarries, located in regions such as the Eastern Desert and Sinai, were invaluable sources of limestone, granite, sandstone, and basalt. These materials were essential for constructing temples, palaces, and monumental tombs. Quarries like those in Aswan provided the red granite used in obelisks and colossal statues, while the limestone from Tural was widely used for cladding pyramids and important buildings. The skill of Egyptian stonemasons in extracting and transporting these giant stones is still admired by engineers and historians today. Besides the quarries, Egypt intensively exploited its copper and turquoise mines, mainly located on the Sinai Peninsula. Copper was vital for manufacturing tools, weapons, and artifacts, while turquoise, one of the most prized semi-precious stones, was used in jewelry and religious ornaments. The Sinai mines were heavily guarded and protected, reflecting the strategic importance of these resources. Control over these mines not only supplied domestic demand but also allowed Egypt to strengthen its trade relations with other civilizations. Gold mining was particularly important and concentrated mainly in Nubia, south of Egypt, where rivers and deserts concealed large veins of this precious metal. Egyptian gold was highly valued and used not only to create ornaments and sacred artifacts but also as a demonstration of the pharaoh's wealth and power. State-organized expeditions included large contingents of workers, engineers, and soldiers, all tasked with extracting and protecting this vital resource. The gold extracted from the mines financed large projects and helped maintain the luxury of the court. The exploration of natural resources was not limited to mining. Expeditions to remote areas also sought precious and semi-precious stones, such as lapis lazuli, amethyst, and carnelian, used in jewelry, amulets, and artworks. These materials were symbolically powerful, representing protection and status, and were often associated with the gods. The art of Egyptian jewelry, with its intricate combinations of gold and colorful stones, became a lasting symbol of the splendor of ancient Egypt. The Second Intermediate Period was a phase of crisis and fragmentation that marked the end of the Middle Kingdom and brought profound changes to Egypt. During this time, the country was invaded and dominated by the Hyksos, a Semitic people from the Levant who brought new technologies and military strategies to Egypt. The arrival of the Hyksos is often seen as one of the most challenging moments in Egyptian history. marking the beginning of a period of division and political uncertainty that would last about a century. The Hyksos settled in the Nile Delta and quickly took control of trade routes and fertile lands, imposing their authority over Lower Egypt. With the city of Avaris as their capital, they ruled as foreign pharaohs, adopting many Egyptian customs but maintaining their distinct identity. They introduced new military technologies, such as the use of horses and war chariots, composite bows, and new fortification techniques, which revolutionized the way wars were waged in Egypt. The presence of the Hyksos destabilized Egypt's central power, dividing the country into three main regions: the north controlled by the Hyksos, the center administered by rival dynasties in Thebes, and the south under the rule of local chiefs. This fragmentation created a power vacuum that further weakened the economy and the political unity of Egypt. During this period, trade expeditions and resource exploitation declined, severely impacting the kingdom's wealth and stability. The Hyksos occupation was a severe blow to Egyptian pride, as Egypt, which had previously been an almost impenetrable power, now found itself subjugated by foreign invaders. However, the coexistence with the Hyksos also brought unexpected benefits. The Egyptians adopted and adapted many of the technological innovations brought by the invaders, which later gave them a significant advantage when they rebelled to reclaim their territory. The resistance against the Hyksos began to take shape in Upper Egypt, led by the Theban dynasty, which refused to accept foreign rule. Pharaohs like Seqenenre and his sons, Kamose and Ahmose, led decisive military campaigns to expel the Hyksos and reunify the country. Seqenenre, known as the Brave, died in combat, but his fight inspired the Egyptians to continue resisting. Finally, Ahmose I, after a series of fierce battles, managed to defeat the Hyksos and capture Avaris, ending the occupation. The victory over the Hyksos and the reunification of Egypt under Ahmose I marked the end of the Second Intermediate Period and the beginning of the New Kingdom, a new era of power and glory for Egypt. The New Kingdom is considered the Golden Age of Egypt, a period of military, cultural, and economic splendor that elevated the country to the status of a superpower in the ancient world. After expelling the Hyksos, Ahmose I founded the 18th dynasty and initiated a series of reforms that restored order and consolidated central power. With Thebes as the capital, the New Kingdom saw the rise of iconic pharaohs, monumental temples, and an unprecedented territorial expansion that transformed Egypt into an empire respected and feared by its neighbors. During the New Kingdom, the pharaohs built some of the most impressive monuments in Egyptian history. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to the god Ammonius, was continuously expanded over the centuries, becoming the largest religious complex of the ancient world. Other notable temples include Luxor, Abu Simbel, and the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari. These constructions not only glorified the gods but also solidified the pharaoh's power, displaying their wealth and religious devotion. The administration of the New Kingdom was highly sophisticated, with a complex bureaucracy that included viziers, priests, and scribes who assisted in managing the empire. Trade flourished, with routes extending to Asia, the Mediterranean, and Africa, bringing goods such as incense, myrrh, wood, gold, and ivory. This trade not only enriched Egypt but also introduced new cultural and technological influences. Diplomacy was equally important, with treaties and political marriages that strengthened alliances and avoided unnecessary conflicts. Hatshepsut is one of the most fascinating and enigmatic figures in ancient Egyptian history during the New Kingdom. Reigning as pharaoh between 1479 and 1458 BC, she broke social norms by becoming one of the few women to occupy the Egyptian throne as a full pharaoh, not just as a regent. Hatshepsut began her reign as regent for her stepson Thutmose III, but quickly took full control, adopting all the titles and regalia of a pharaoh, including the use of a false beard and male attire in official representations, to legitimize her rule. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and married her half-brother Thutmose II, assuming the role of great royal wife. After Thutmose II's death, his son Thutmose III was too young to rule, giving Hatshepsut the opportunity to become regent. However, instead of relinquishing power when Thutmose III came of age, Hatshepsut proclaimed herself pharaoh, a bold move that defied the norms of the time and redefined the role of women in Egyptian royalty. During her reign, Hatshepsut focused on construction projects and economic expansion rather than military campaigns, characterizing her rule as a period of peace and prosperity. Her architectural legacy is notable, with the construction of magnificent monuments that still testify to her grandeur. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the most impressive in Egypt, known for its colonnades, detailed reliefs, and harmonious integration with the natural surroundings. This temple is considered a masterpiece of Egyptian architecture. Hatshepsut also revitalized foreign trade, organizing a famous expedition to the land of Punt, a region rich in incense, myrrh, gold, and ebony, possibly located in the Horn of Africa. The inscriptions and reliefs in the Temple of Deir el-Bahari vividly describe this expedition, showing ships loaded with riches and exotic plants brought back to Egypt. This initiative not only boosted the economy but also strengthened diplomatic ties and Hatshepsut's image as a visionary and prosperous leader. Throughout her reign, Hatshepsut promoted an image of legitimacy and divinity. She also emphasized her divine lineage to the god Ammonius, presenting herself as chosen by the gods to lead Egypt. This careful image construction and propaganda helped stabilize her rule and secure the support of the Egyptian elite and the Ammonius priesthood, who were influential in society at the time. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III assumed the throne and, for reasons still debated by historians, attempted to erase the legacy of his stepmother, removing her images and destroying her statues. However, Hatshepsut's impact could not be completely erased. She is remembered as one of the most successful rulers of ancient Egypt, whose reign brought peace, prosperity, and an architectural legacy that has stood the test of time. Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, is remembered as one of the most powerful and successful warrior pharaohs in Egyptian history. Ruling from 1479 BC to 1425 BC, he transformed Egypt into a true superpower, leading numerous military campaigns that expanded the empire's borders to the Levant and Nubia. Although he initially ruled under the shadow of Hatshepsut, his stepmother and co-regent, Thutmose III emerged as a strategic and charismatic military leader after assuming full power. Thutmose III conducted more than 17 military campaigns during his reign, demonstrating impressive tactical skills that made him feared and respected by his enemies. One of his most celebrated victories was the Battle of Megiddo, where he led his troops in a daring siege maneuver that forced the Canaanite princes to surrender. This victory not only consolidated Egyptian dominance in the region but also marked the beginning of a new era of Egyptian hegemony in the Middle East, establishing Egypt as the leading military and diplomatic power. To ensure control over the conquered regions, Thutmose III implemented a series of innovative administrative policies, including the practice of bringing the children of foreign leaders to Egypt, where they were educated at the Egyptian court. This method, which can be seen as a form of hostage diplomacy, ensured the loyalty of the vassal nations and created a generation of foreign leaders favorable to Egypt. At the same time, this reinforced Egyptian cultural influence and effectively integrated these regions into the empire. Thutmose III's reign was also marked by vast architectural and artistic production. He ordered the construction of numerous temples, monuments, and obelisks, including significant expansions in the Karnak complex, where his military campaigns were recorded in detail on the temple walls. The inscriptions and reliefs depicting his victories not only celebrated his achievements, but also served as propaganda to reinforce his image as an invincible leader. His dedication to construction and art helped perpetuate his memory as one of Egypt's great pharaohs. Thutmose III was also a shrewd administrator, and his reign brought prosperity and innovation to Egypt. He reorganized the kingdom's finances, ensuring that tributes from conquered lands flowed into the Egyptian treasury. The wealth acquired through military campaigns was used to finance construction projects, strengthen the empire's defenses, and improve agricultural infrastructure. His efficient administration and the constant influx of foreign resources allowed Egypt to maintain its superpower status throughout his reign. Thutmose III's influence extended far beyond his military conquests. He left a lasting legacy as one of Egypt's greatest builders, an innovative military leader, and a brilliant strategist who consolidated the empire during a golden era. Akhenaten, originally named Amenhotep IV, was one of the most controversial and innovative pharaohs of ancient Egypt, known for his radical religious revolution. Upon ascending the throne around 1353 BC, he challenged centuries of tradition by rejecting the worship of Egypt's traditional gods, especially Ammonius, and introduced monotheism with the exclusive worship of the god Aten, represented by the solar disk. Akhenaten believed that Aten was the only true god, and his intense devotion to this deity led him to completely reshape the religious, political, and artistic life of Egypt. Akhenaten's wife, Nefertiti, was a central figure during his reign and is remembered as one of the most beautiful and powerful queens in Egyptian history. Nefertiti played a significant role in promoting the worship of Aten, appearing alongside Akhenaten in reliefs and sculptures in positions of power nearly equal to the pharaoh. The royal couple was depicted in a much more intimate and realistic manner than any previous pharaoh, emphasizing family moments and scenes of devotion to the solar god, marking a break from the traditional representations of Egyptian royalty. To reinforce his new religion, Akhenaten built a new capital called Akhetaten, now known as Amarna, located halfway between Memphis and Thebes. Akhetaten was designed as a city dedicated to Aten, with grand temples, palaces, and residences reflecting the revolutionary artistic style of the Amarna period. The city was built in record time, with architecture emphasizing sunlight and open spaces, symbolizing the proximity of the pharaoh and his family to the god Aten, while the old priestly elite of Ammonius was stripped of its power and influence. The art of the Amarna period, under the patronage of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, broke radically with past conventions. Representations became more naturalistic, with elongated figures, narrow heads, and realistic features such as physical imperfections and emotive expressions. Akhenaten's religious revolution, however, was poorly received by many Egyptians, who saw the worship of Aten as a threat to the traditional order and an affront to the gods who had protected Egypt for millennia. The new religion did not take root among the people, and after Akhenaten's death, there was a rapid return to traditional cults. Akhenaten's successor, Tutankhamun, restored the worship of Ammonius and other gods, and the city of Amarna was abandoned. This brief but intense period was largely erased from official memories, with temples dismantled and inscriptions of Akhenaten's name obliterated. Despite his failure to establish monotheism, Akhenaten's revolution left a lasting impact on Egyptian history. His reign is seen as a bold experiment and a unique moment of rupture in Egypt's religious continuity. Nefertiti, with her iconic image immortalized in busts and sculptures, continues to fascinate as a symbol of feminine power and beauty. Tutankhamun, one of the best-known pharaohs of Egypt, reigned during a short and tumultuous period between 1332 and 1323 BC. Despite his reign being relatively insignificant in terms of political and military achievements, his fame is due to the spectacular discovery of his intact tomb in 1922 by archaeologist Howard Carter. Known as the Boy Pharaoh, due to his ascension to the throne at around 9 years of age, Tutankhamun is a symbol of ancient Egypt, whose premature death and richly decorated burial continue to fascinate the world. Tutankhamun ascended the throne after the tumultuous Amarna period, ruled by his predecessor and probable father, Akhenaten, who had attempted to revolutionize the Egyptian religion. Shortly after taking power, Tutankhamun, under the guidance of his advisors and the powerful priest reversed Akhenaten's religious reforms, restoring the worship of the ancient gods and reopening the temples of Ammonius that had been closed. This restoration was crucial for pacifying the clergy and the population, who longed for the return to tradition and order that had been disrupted. Tutankhamun's reign, though brief, was marked by attempts to recover Egypt from an era of religious and social disorder. He moved his capital back to Thebes and began to rebuild the shrines damaged by his father. Despite his youth, the young pharaoh was seen as a symbol of renewal and hope, representing a return to ancient times and the favor of the gods. However, he never had the chance to achieve great feats, dying mysteriously at around 19 years old, likely due to health complications including a broken leg and infections. The true impact of Tutankhamun came centuries after his death, when his tomb was discovered nearly intact in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb, which had remained hidden from the common looting of antiquity, contained an unprecedented treasure, over 5,000 objects, including furniture, jewelry, weapons, chariots, and the famous solid gold funerary mask, which became one of the most recognized symbols of ancient Egypt. Each item, richly decorated and meticulously preserved, offered the modern world an unparalleled glimpse of the opulence and life of ancient Egypt. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 sparked a true Egyptian craze around the world. The intact entrance, the gleam of gold, and the presence of invaluable artifacts captivated the public's imagination, generating a wave of fascination for Egypt that persists to this day. It is believed that the curse of Tutankhamun, a legend that those who disturbed his tomb would suffer tragedies, emerged after the deaths of several members of the excavation team, fueling the myth and mystery surrounding the pharaoh. Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, is one of the most iconic and powerful pharaohs in Egyptian history, reigning for an impressive 66 years from 1279 BC to 1213 BC. His reign marked the peak of the New Kingdom and was characterized by a series of great military achievements, monumental construction projects, and administrative management that solidified his legacy as one of the greatest pharaohs of all time. He was a charismatic leader, a skilled strategist, and above all, a master of propaganda, using his victories and constructions to eternalize his name. One of Ramses II's greatest military feats was the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, one of the largest conflicts of antiquity. Although the battle technically ended in a stalemate, Ramses used propaganda to declare himself victorious, with reliefs in temples and monuments depicting him as a fearless warrior who saved his troops from certain defeat. The Battle of Kadesh is also notable for the peace treaty that followed, the first documented peace treaty in history, signed between Ramses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III, marking an important diplomatic moment. Ramses II was an indefatigable builder, and his architectural works are found throughout Egypt, reflecting his desire to immortalize his image and celebrate his glory. Among his most impressive constructions are the temples of Abu Simbel, carved into the rock in Nubia, with enormous statues of Ramses seated that guard the entrance to the temple. This complex was designed to celebrate the victory over Egypt's enemies and to demonstrate the greatness of the pharaoh, aligning in such a way that, twice a year, the sun illuminated the inner statues, a surprising feat of engineering. Another notable work of Ramses II is the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple in Thebes, which celebrates his victories, achievements, and connection with the gods. The temple walls are covered with reliefs that tell of his military campaigns and acts of devotion. He also completed the expansion of the Karnak temple and contributed to the beautification of Luxor. His architectural style was marked by grandeur and the use of colossi depicting his figure, constantly reinforcing his presence and authority. Ramses II also had a significant impact on daily life in Egypt. He oversaw large irrigation projects and public works that improved agriculture and increased the country's prosperity. During his reign, Egypt experienced a time of internal stability and economic prosperity, allowing the population to grow and cities to expand. Ramses' administration was highly efficient, with an organized bureaucracy that ensured the collection of taxes and the maintenance of the infrastructures vital to the empire. With more than 100 children from various wives, Ramses II is also remembered for his extensive family, symbolizing his vitality and power. After his death at the age of 90, a remarkable age for the time, he left a lasting legacy that influenced not only his successors but also how Egypt would be remembered in history. Ramses II became a model for the pharaohs who came after him, and his reputation as a great builder and warrior endured throughout the centuries, immortalizing him as one of the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt. The end of the New Kingdom marked the beginning of a period of decline and instability for Egypt, known as the Third Intermediate Period. Starting in 1070 BC, Egypt began to lose the political cohesion and military prestige it had maintained for centuries. The central power of the pharaohs weakened, and the country divided into various regional factions, while internal conflicts and external threats began to erode national unity. This period was characterized by political fragmentation, the weakening of central government, and a series of invasions that transformed Egypt's political landscape. One of the main causes of the decline was the growing influence of the priests of Ammonius in Thebes, who began to rival the power of the pharaohs. During the reign of Ramses XI, the last pharaoh of the New Kingdom, Upper Egypt fell under the control of the Ammonius priests, who ruled almost autonomously, while Lower Egypt was controlled by military leaders and other minor dynasties. This division between the north and south made it impossible to maintain a unified government, and further weakened the authority of the pharaoh. In addition to internal fragmentation, Egypt faced constant external pressures. Invasions by the Sea Peoples, Libyans, and Nubians placed the country under continuous stress. The fortifications at the borders, which once protected the empire, failed to stop the advance of the invaders. The country, once a center of power and wealth, became vulnerable and unable to protect its borders. This era was also marked by a significant cultural and administrative decline. The collapse of central power meant the abandonment of many construction projects and the maintenance of ancient monuments. The economy suffered from a reduction in international trade, and the wealth accumulated during the New Kingdom began to diminish. Decentralization turned Egypt into a collection of small independent kingdoms, each ruled by local leaders vying for control of territories and resources. The weakness of the central government and the fragmentation of power made Egypt vulnerable to invaders who sought to control its wealth and strategic resources. Among the most significant invaders were the Libyans, Nubians, and Assyrians, each leaving their mark on Egyptian history and shaping the country's destiny during these turbulent centuries. The Libyans, coming from the west, began infiltrating Egypt's borders during the New Kingdom, but it was during the Third Intermediate Period that their presence became dominant. Many Libyans served as mercenaries in the Egyptian army and eventually settled permanently in the Nile Delta. Eventually, Libyan dynasties, such as the 22nd dynasty founded by Shoshenq, took control of Lower Egypt. These Libyan pharaohs quickly adapted to Egyptian culture, adopting traditions, titles, and religious practices, but their reigns were often marked by rivalries with other Egyptian factions. From the south, the Nubians also played a crucial role during this troubled period. The Nubian rulers of the region of Kush observed Egypt's weakness and seized the opportunity to expand their influence. Pi, the king of Kush, led a series of military campaigns that culminated in the conquest of Egypt around 728 BC, establishing the 25th dynasty, known as the Nubian dynasty. Pi and his successors, like Taharqa, saw themselves as restorers of Egypt's glory, promoting a cultural renaissance that evoked the traditions of the pharaonic past. However, the Nubian pharaohs faced constant challenges from other foreign powers, mainly the Assyrians. At the height of its expansion, the Assyrian Empire saw Egypt as a strategic and economic target. Under the leadership of kings such as Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, the Assyrians launched devastating campaigns against Egypt, capturing Memphis and forcing the Nubian pharaohs to retreat south. The Assyrian occupation was brutal, marked by looting and destruction, and symbolized a new phase of foreign domination over once mighty Egypt. The Assyrian invasions not only toppled the Nubians but also further fragmented control over Egypt, leaving the country divided between Assyrian vassals in the north and local factions in constant conflict. The Assyrian presence was a bitter reminder of how far Egypt had fallen from its golden age. From this point on, Egypt would never again be able to maintain itself as an independent power for long periods, always at the mercy of stronger invaders. The invasions of the Libyans, Nubians, and Assyrians were devastating for Egypt but also demonstrated the country's cultural resilience. Each invading group, despite their conquest, was largely assimilated into Egyptian culture, adopting customs, religion, and the pharaonic identity itself. The Sate Renaissance, which began around 664 BC, was a period of cultural and political revitalization in Egypt, marked by a brief resurgence of pharaonic power and glory after centuries of invasions and fragmentation. This period is named after Sais, the Nile Delta city from which the 26th dynasty emerged. Rulers like Psamtik managed to reunify Egypt, repel foreign invaders, and restore internal order, leading to a return to traditions and a renewed appreciation for classical Egyptian culture. Psamtik I, the founder of the Sate dynasty, consolidated his power by forming alliances with Greek and Lydian mercenaries, who became an important part of his army. With the help of these allies, he managed to expel the last remnants of Assyrian occupation and restore Egyptian control over the territory. Psamtik promoted the centralization of government, strengthened the economy through Mediterranean trade, and initiated a series of administrative reforms that stabilized the kingdom, bringing a brief period of peace and prosperity. The Sate Renaissance was characterized by a cultural revival that consciously sought to imitate and revive the great traditions of the old and new kingdoms. The Sate pharaohs invested heavily in the restoration of ancient temples, revitalizing the art, architecture, and religion of Egypt. Works of art produced during this period are known for their neoclassical style, which sought to replicate the glories of the past, celebrating the pharaohs as guardians of ancestral traditions. This resurgence of Egyptian classicism was an attempt to reconnect the country with its cultural identity. Trade flourished again under the Sate pharaohs, and Sais became a vibrant commercial center, attracting merchants from across the Mediterranean. The Egyptians renewed contacts with the Greeks, Phoenicians, and other civilizations, resulting in an enriching cultural and economic exchange. The Sate pharaohs also expanded the Egyptian navy, strengthening control over trade routes and exploring new territories along the Mediterranean and Red Sea coasts. This commercial dynamism helped revitalize the Egyptian economy, bringing wealth and stability to the kingdom. Despite efforts to restore Egypt's glory, the Sate Renaissance was also marked by a constant state of alert against external threats, especially from the growing Persian and Babylonian empires. The Sate pharaohs sought to align diplomatically and militarily with other regional powers to try to maintain Egyptian independence. However, this strategy of balancing power proved unsustainable as the Persians became the main threat to Egypt, leading to increased military tension on the eastern borders. The Sate Renaissance came to an end with the Persian invasion in 525 BC, led by Cambyses II, who defeated Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. The conquest of Egypt by the Persians in 525 BC marked the beginning of a new chapter of foreign domination in the country's history. Under the command of Cambyses II, the Persian Empire defeated the last pharaoh of the 26th dynasty, Psamtik III, at the Battle of Pelusium, using a combination of military force and psychological strategies. The Persian occupation transformed Egypt into a satrapy, a province governed by a satrap appointed directly by the Persian king, who administered the land on behalf of the emperor. This dominion lasted nearly 200 years, during which Egypt was integrated into the vast Persian Empire. Cambyses II, who proclaimed himself pharaoh, attempted to legitimize his rule by adopting some aspects of Egyptian culture, but his reign was largely marked by repressive policies and disdain for local traditions. Ancient accounts, though often exaggerated, described Cambyses as a cruel ruler who plundered temples and disrespected Egyptian gods, exacerbating the population's resentment. These acts were seen as an affront to the religious and cultural order that previous pharaohs had maintained for millennia. The Persians, however, also contributed to the administrative and military development of Egypt, incorporating new technologies and reforming the tax structure to increase efficiency. The Persian government maintained trade and some economic practices, but many Egyptian resources were redirected to support the broader Persian Empire, especially in its military campaigns against Greece. Egypt, which had once been an independent power center, now served as a strategic base and resource source for the empire. During Persian rule, there were several attempts at rebellion by the Egyptians, who sought to regain their independence. Resistance movements were led by local nobles and former pharaohs who tried to ally with other powers, such as the Greeks, in the hope of expelling the Persians. Some of these rebellions were temporarily successful, but the Persian response was often swift and brutal, suppressing uprisings and strengthening their control over the territory. One of the most notable periods of resistance occurred during the reign of Artaxerxes III, who faced a significant rebellion led by Nectanebo II, the last native pharaoh of Egypt. Nectanebo II managed to resist the Persians for a time but was eventually defeated, marking the definitive end of Egyptian sovereignty. With his fall, Egypt once again became a Persian satrapy, and any hope of restoring native pharaonic power was virtually extinguished until the arrival of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great's arrival in Egypt in 332 BC marked a crucial turning point in the country's history, ending centuries of Persian rule and ushering in a new era of governance under the Macedonians. Alexander, then on his campaign to expand the Macedonian Empire, was welcomed as a liberator by the Egyptian people, tired of Persian oppression. Without encountering significant resistance, he took control of Egypt peacefully and was quickly recognized as the new pharaoh in a ceremony that respected traditional Egyptian rituals. Alexander demonstrated deep respect for Egyptian culture and religion, distinguishing himself from his Persian predecessors. He made it a point to visit the temple of Ammonius in Siwa, in the western oasis, where he was declared the son of Ammonius by the priests, reinforcing his legitimacy as pharaoh in the eyes of the Egyptians. This act was not just a political move but also an attempt to connect spiritually with the people and the Egyptian gods, linking his legacy with that of the pharaohs who preceded him. One of Alexander's most enduring achievements in Egypt was the founding of the city of Alexandria, which quickly became one of the greatest cultural, economic, and intellectual centers of the ancient world. Designed as a modern city, Alexandria was strategically located in the Nile Delta with direct access to the Mediterranean, transforming it into a vibrant port and a bridge between the Hellenistic world and Egypt. The city was planned with wide avenues, palaces, and a famous library that would house the greatest knowledge of antiquity. Alexandria was not just a city but a symbol of the cultural syncretism that Alexander promoted. The city attracted scholars, artists, traders, and thinkers from all over the Mediterranean world, creating a melting pot of ideas and innovations. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, stood as an example of the grandeur of the new capital. This environment of cultural exchange helped preserve and expand the Egyptian legacy while introducing new Greek influences, shaping the identity of Ptolemaic Egypt. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, Egypt became an essential part of the empire divided among his generals. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted companions, took control of Egypt, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule the country for nearly 300 years. The Ptolemaic period, which extended from 332 BC to 30 BC, was an era of Greek governance in Egypt, marked by a complex cultural fusion between Egyptian traditions and the Hellenistic influences brought by the new rulers. After Alexander the Great's death, Egypt fell into the hands of Ptolemy Isoter, one of Alexander's generals, who established the Ptolemaic dynasty. This dynasty ruled Egypt as pharaohs, maintaining many Egyptian traditions but also introducing Greek practices and lifestyles, creating a period of cultural richness and complexity. Ptolemy I and his successors presented themselves as legitimate pharaohs of Egypt, adopting Egyptian iconography and religious rituals while promoting Greek culture. This duality was a defining characteristic of the Ptolemaic period. The Ptolemies were depicted in pharaonic style in temples and associated themselves with Egyptian gods, but in their private lives and administration, they maintained Greek language, customs, and laws. This syncretic approach helped legitimize their rule and pacify both the Egyptian population and the Greek elite. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great, flourished even more during the Ptolemaic period, becoming one of the most important cultural and intellectual centers of the ancient world. The city housed the famous Library of Alexandria, which became the largest repository of knowledge of the time, attracting scholars from all over the Mediterranean. Under the Ptolemies, Alexandria also stood out as a center of science, philosophy, and arts, where brilliant minds like Euclid and Archimedes made significant advances in mathematics and physics. The Ptolemies were great patrons of the construction of temples and monuments, both in Egyptian and Greek styles. They expanded and beautified ancient temples and built new shrines dedicated to Egyptian gods, such as the Temple of Edfu, dedicated to the god Horus, and the Temple of Dendera, dedicated to the goddess Hathor. These construction projects not only reinforced the power of the Ptolemies but also served as symbols of continuity and respect for Egyptian traditions, even under foreign rule. Despite their successes, the Ptolemaic period was also marked by internal conflicts, dynastic intrigues, and increasing involvement with Rome, which would eventually lead to the dynasty's downfall. The Ptolemies faced a series of economic crises and popular revolts, exacerbated by disputes for the throne and the growing dependence on mercenaries and foreign alliances. Roman intervention in Egypt increased over time, and the rivalry between the last members of the dynasty, especially between Ptolemy XIII and his famous sister Cleopatra VII, paved the way for Egypt's eventual annexation by Rome. Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the last pharaoh of Egypt, is one of the most iconic and fascinating figures in ancient history. Born in 69 BC, Cleopatra stood out for her intelligence, charisma, and political skill during a period of great instability and conflict. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra was a leader who embraced both her Greek roots and Egyptian heritage, being the first of the dynasty to speak the Egyptian language. This connection to local culture helped reinforce her legitimacy as queen and her popularity among the Egyptians. Cleopatra ascended to the throne at 18, initially ruling alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, following the Ptolemaic tradition of co-regency between siblings. However, tensions between the two quickly escalated, culminating in a civil war for absolute control of Egypt. Clever and determined, Cleopatra sought strategic alliances to secure her power, and her association with Julius Caesar was a brilliant move that put her back on the throne. She met Caesar in Alexandria and, through her intelligence and charm, secured his support, resulting in victory over her brother. Cleopatra's relationship with Julius Caesar was not just political. The two became lovers and had a son, Caesarion, whom Cleopatra hoped would be the future leader of both Egypt and Rome. During her stay in Rome, Cleopatra impressed the Roman elite with her presence and opulence, but she also generated controversy and distrust among the Romans, who saw her influence as a threat to Roman control. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra returned to Egypt, facing an even more complex political landscape. Cleopatra then formed an alliance with Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful leaders after Caesar's death. The partnership between Cleopatra and Mark Antony was both political and romantic, resulting in one of the most famous love stories in history. Together, they tried to challenge the growing power of Octavian, the future Augustus. Cleopatra and Antony united their armies and resources but faced a series of defeats, culminating in the disastrous Battle of Actium in 31 BC. The Battle of Actium, fought on September 2, 31 BC, was one of the decisive confrontations that sealed Egypt's fate and marked the end of its independence. This naval battle, fought off the western coast of Greece, pitted the combined forces of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony against the legions of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus. Actium was not just a military battle but the climax of a long power struggle between Octavian and Mark Antony for control of Rome, and by extension, the Mediterranean. The defeat of Cleopatra and Antony not only decided the future of Rome but also that of Egypt. The battle was a grand spectacle of strategy and naval power, with hundreds of warships in combat. Mark Antony and Cleopatra positioned their fleet at Actium, hoping to break Octavian's blockade and secure an escape route to Egypt. However, Octavian's tactics, skillfully commanded by his general Agrippa, outmaneuvered Antony's. Octavian's fleet was more agile and better equipped, and defections among Antony's forces further weakened his position. During the confrontation, Cleopatra, realizing the battle was lost, withdrew with her fleet, leading Antony to follow her in a desperate retreat. Cleopatra and Antony's flight marked the end of their hopes to challenge Octavian. Back in Egypt, they attempted to reorganize their defenses, but their forces were demoralized, and resources were scarce. Octavian, now relentless, followed them to Egypt, determined to capture his enemies and put an end to the threat they posed to his power. Octavian's entry into Alexandria met little resistance, marking the beginning of the final siege and the collapse of Antony and Cleopatra's last major resistance. Facing inevitable defeat, Mark Antony committed suicide, believing Cleopatra had done the same. Shortly thereafter, Cleopatra, in an attempt to avoid being captured alive and humiliated in Rome, also took her own life, reportedly by allowing a venomous snake to bite her. The deaths of both marked the end not only of one of antiquity's most famous love stories, but also the end of the last pharaonic reign in Egypt. With Cleopatra and Antony dead, Octavian consolidated his control, and Egypt was formally annexed into the Roman Empire. The annexation of Egypt as a Roman province brought profound changes to the country. Egypt became the economic jewel of the empire, controlling important trade routes and providing large quantities of grain that sustained Rome. The administration of Egypt was under the direct control of the emperor, and Roman governors, often called prefects, ensured that Egypt remained a highly protected and productive region. However, Egyptian cultural identity was slowly suppressed, and Egypt lost the autonomy that had characterized its millennial history. The Battle of Actium and the subsequent death of Cleopatra symbolized the end of the pharaoh's era and the transformation of Egypt from a sovereign kingdom to a province subordinate to Rome. This event marked the end of a civilization that had endured for over 3 millennia, from the emergence of the first villages along the Nile to the glorious empire that built the pyramids and temples that still marvel the world today. Egyptian independence was lost, but Egypt's cultural heritage and history continued to influence and fascinate the world, even under the rule of new masters. Roman rule over Egypt lasted until the 4th century AD, when the empire began to fragment under the pressure of barbarian invasions and internal crises. The Christianization of Egypt in the 4th century brought a new cultural and religious dynamic, with the gradual end of traditional Egyptian cults and the rise of Christianity as the dominant religion. This period of transition marked the beginning of the end of Egypt's pharaonic identity, as the country moved increasingly into the cultural and religious orbit of the Roman and later Byzantine Empire. Egypt continued to be a vital province, but its independence and ancient greatness would never be restored. Every temple, every pharaoh, and every hieroglyph reveals a civilization that dared to dream of eternity. The mystery of the pyramids, the power of the gods, and the golden shine of funerary masks capture our imagination, transporting us to a world where man saw himself as divine and death was not the end, but a new beginning. Even after thousands of years, Egypt calls us. Not just for its physical wonders, but for what they represent, the relentless quest for meaning, for life beyond life, for connection with the sacred. Its sands hold secrets that still challenge, move, and inspire us. Ancient Egypt is more than history. It is a powerful reminder of our own human journey, of our will to leave a legacy that resonates in eternity. If you, like us, are enchanted by the grand stories and mysteries of ancient Egypt, leave in the comments your favorite part of Egyptian history, who your favorite characters are, and what this fascinating culture represents for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any details of the next civilizations we will explore. Leave your like, share with those who also love history, and join us on this journey through the civilizations that shape the world. Your adventure through eternity begins here.